Hey all, welcome to the Microsoft Azure overview. So who am I? Hi, my name is Luke Murray and I'm an information systems professional with over 15 years experience in the support, maintenance and technical delivery in IT environments across small, medium businesses and enterprises, working specifically with Microsoft technology. 5 of those 10 years has been working with the cloud, particularly with the Microsoft Azure ecosystem, which is really where my passion lies. You can find me on my Twitter at LukeMurrayNZ, or you can just visit my blog luke.geek.nz. I'm a certified Azure Solutions Architect in Hamilton, New Zealand. Let's start with Azure readiness and some common terminology. Private cloud is when your compute infrastructure is hosted on your on-premises or a locally hosted data center. You are still responsible for the security, access, and maintenance of the compute and storage. We are in the fourth industrial revolution with hyperscale public clouds offerings such as the likes of Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, and of course Microsoft Azure. With the increase in innovation, time to market, and increased pressure to perform from our customers and our competitors, we need to remain on top of increasing security threats without wasting energy in keeping our underlying infrastructure running and focus on the services that actually bring value. A hybrid cloud, sometimes called cloud hybrid, is a computing environment that combines a private cloud with a public cloud, allowing data and applications to be shared between them. Some people define hybrid cloud to include multi-cloud configurations where an organization uses more than one public cloud, such as Azure and AWS, in addition to their own on-premise data center. When architecting systems for the cloud, a few organizations go for a cloud-first approach. This includes SaaS before PaaS, PaaS before IaaS. What does that actually mean? So, software as a service, or SaaS, is a software distribution model in which the cloud provider hosts applications and underlying infrastructure. As a consumer, you just need to look after the administration of the service, add users and add data. The maintenance of the infrastructure is all managed by the cloud provider, freeing you to consume and use that service. An example of this would be Exchange Online. Platform as a service, or PaaS, is a platform distribution model in which the cloud provider hosts the underlying infrastructure, but you as a consumer have the creative freedom on how that service is used. The ability to create and manage your applications, but without the maintenance of the infrastructure, which is all managed by the cloud provider. This frees you up to consume and develop valuable services. PaaS services are fully integrated into the Azure Fabric, allowing you to easily scale out your services to match demand with high availability and reliability architected from the get-go. An example of this would be SQL as a service. Infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, is an infrastructure distribution model in which the cloud provider hosts the underlying hardware, but you are still responsible and have full access to the operating system, such as Windows Server. IaaS machines are your traditional Linux and Windows Server virtual machines. So let's continue on our Azure readiness journey. What will trigger a move into Microsoft Azure? So your local data center contract is about to expire, so you're looking at alternatives and costings. You may realize that the total cost of ownership, or those incidents caused by having to just manage the hardware, just doesn't make sense anymore. You need to quickly integrate your acquisitions, so you may acquire another company and find it hasn't been budgeted for. With Microsoft Azure, you can leverage pay-as-you-go, so you not only pay for what you consume, allowing you to migrate infrastructure quickly without having to purchase more rack space or infrastructure hardware. And it allows the company to continue to add value faster without having to wait for those things to arrive. And hardware shortages at the moment are one of those things that come to mind. Software and hardware refresh. Those 3 or 5 year projects replacing, upgrading all your on-premise hosts simply make no sense. when you can spend a fraction of the time concentrating on the services that IT actually bring to an organization, rather than wasting money keeping the infrastructure working and trying to estimate capacity in the next few years. You may be tired of having to give up your weekend and holidays trying to patch on-premise systems that are targeted by security vulnerabilities all the time, and with no single pane of glass of your workloads and the changes happening within each virtual machine, where Azure gives you the ability to see everything that's happening. With security threats, you may be tired of just having to give up your weekend and holidays trying to patch on-premises systems that are targeted all the time with no single pane of glass for your workloads and the changes happening inside each virtual machine. It can be quite hard. And finally, application innovation. With every organization fighting to stay competitive, you need to be able to pivot services in ways to target new markets and deliver faster than your competitors. Microsoft Azure excels in this space, and your business can scale from regional to global using the same ecosystem that you may already be familiar with, i.e. Microsoft Azure. So let's talk about the scale of the Microsoft Hyperscale Cloud. Luke, you've spoken about Azure. You've kind of given us why you'd want to migrate there, but what does it mean? What capabilities? So as the name implies, Microsoft Azure is a hyperscale cloud. So hyperscale is all about achieving massive scale in computing, typically for big data or cloud computing. Hyperscale infrastructure is designed for horizontal scalability and leads to high levels of performance, throughput, and redundancy to enable fault tolerance and high availability. Hyperscale computing often relies on massive scalable server architecture and virtual network. So this is the kind of infrastructure that you just can't create yourself. A global company like Microsoft has the capability and the knowledge to expand, adapt, and set this up to perform really, really well. And with over 60 regions, more than any other current cloud provider, the Azure Global Infrastructure is made up of two key components: physical infrastructure and connective network components. So the physical component is comprised of 200 plus physical data centers arranged into regions and linked by one of the largest interconnected networks on the planet. With the connectivity of the global Azure network, each of the Azure data centers provide high availability, low latency, scalability, and the latest advancements in cloud infrastructure, all running on the Azure Fabric platform. The Microsoft network is comprised of 165,000 miles of lit fiber cable and undersea cable systems. Together, these components keep data entirely within the trusted Microsoft network, and IP traffic never enters the public internet. Chances are there is an Azure region by you. A New Zealand North region is getting constructed as we speak, so exciting times for us in New Zealand. You never know if a region close to you isn't too far off. So Microsoft has 5 different types of Azure environments. Most are familiar with the Azure Commercial, but there is Azure Commercial, Azure Government, Azure Government Secret, Azure Government Top Secret, and Azure Canary. The Azure Government Cloud is a cloud environment specifically built to meet the compliance and security requirements by the US and other governments. This mission-critical cloud delivers breakthrough innovation to US government customers and their partners. Unless you are a government, you won't be able to see or deploy to these regions. Azure Government applies to governments of any levels, from state and to local government to federal agency, including the Department of Defense. As the government environment tier raises, i.e. from Azure Government to Azure Government Top Secret, there's an increase in security by default, up to full IRS 1075 and NIST 800 compliance. The Azure Canary environment is used by Microsoft internally to test preview features and functionality that hasn't been deployed to the production environments yet. Microsoft Commercial is where your resources are most likely to sit when you are an enterprise, SMB, or even individual users. It is their production retail environment, and this is where your resources are likely to be. So the Azure Cloud Platform is more than 200 products with over 6,000 cloud services designed to help you bring new solutions to life, to solve today's challenges and create the future. Build, run, and manage applications across multiple clouds, on-premises and at the edge with the tools and frameworks of your choice. With services such as Azure Internet of Things to Azure Virtual Desktop, and even Azure Orbital, which offers ground station as a service, providing communication and control of your satellites. There is a ton of services to solve any business challenge you may be facing today or in the future. Microsoft Azure is more than a place to put your virtual machine. It is a living, breathing ecosystem of possibilities. Since Microsoft Azure's initial release 13 years ago, in October of 2008, it has grown to be the world's trusted global enablers. However, it didn't get there by remaining stagnant. Microsoft has spent countless hours reaching out to consumers, businesses on their organization's needs and learn and adopting to new technologies and ways of working to offer services that make a difference. As you can see on the slides, 210 capabilities added in 2014, but 1,076 were added in 2020. There's a saying, what got you here won't get you there. Microsoft have definitely shown us that by delivering and improving services, they have to keep on the ball and change all the time. There are now organizations completely operating from services such as Azure Active Directory and Microsoft 365 alone. Not to mention many of your SaaS applications and games that you play, especially on Xbox One Live, are hosted in Microsoft Azure. Even if a service isn't available that you may need today, doesn't mean it won't be there tomorrow. With the new innovations, Microsoft needs to make sure they are concentrating on the right services as they adapt to changing security threats and consumer demands. As part of this process, some services do get retired. If a service is retired, they give a minimum of 12 months notice to affected parties. Usually this occurs once through an email to the administrators of the affected subscriptions. They also display it in the Azure Health Service dashboard and make public posts about it. They won't just send one email, they'll send a reminder at the 6-month mark, at the 3-month mark, counting down. There's plenty of time for services to be added to your organization's roadmaps and re-architected. Usually a service is replaced as it's been superseded by another service offering the same functionality. When people think of Microsoft Azure, they think of a single data center hosting their workload somewhere in the world. This is not necessarily true, but true at the same time. Microsoft Azure is usually referred to as a region, for example, Australia East or West US. These regions usually consist of availability zones. These availability zones are separate data centers connected through a low latency network with a round-trip latency of less than 2 milliseconds between them. Each zone is composed of one or more data centers equipped with independent power, cooling, and networking infrastructure. Availability zones are designed so if one zone is affected, regional services, capacity, and high availability are supported by the remaining 2 zones. When designing your applications to be highly available, it's recommended to use availability sets. These availability sets allow you to group your virtual machines to provide for greater redundancy and availability. Update domains indicate groups of virtual machines and underlying physical infrastructure that can be rebooted at the same time. When more than 5 virtual machines are configured within an availability set with 5 update domains, the 6th virtual machine is placed into the same update domain as the first virtual machine, and the 7th on the same domain as the second virtual machine, and so on. The order of update domains being rebooted may not proceed sequentially during planned maintenance, but only one update domain is rebooted at a time. A rebooted update domain is given 30 minutes to recover before maintenance is initiated on a different update domain. Fault domains define the group of virtual machines that share a common power source and network switch. By default, the Azure virtual machine configured within your availability set are separated across up to 3 fault domains. While placing your virtual machines into an availability set does not protect your application from operating system or application-specific failures, it does limit the impact of potential physical hardware failures, network outages, or power interruptions. One of the interesting things to keep in mind with availability zones is if you operate your services across multiple subscriptions, Availability Zone 1 will be different from one subscription to the next. Your Availability Zone 2 in one subscription may be Availability Zone 1 in another. This is so Microsoft can help manage the capacity of the data centers. Each Azure region is paired with another region within the same geography, such as Australia East and Southeast. This approach allows for replication of resources such as VM storage across a geography for additional redundancy. That should reduce the likelihood of natural disasters, civil unrest, power outages, or physical network outages affecting both regions at once. Connecting to Microsoft Azure is reasonably straightforward with various ways of connecting depending on your requirements. As a public cloud offering, the vast majority of Microsoft Azure services can be consumed over the internet. They can be whitelisted from certain IPs only or accessible to everyone. Another option is a point-to-site VPN. This connecting allows an agent installed on your device or devices to create a secure tunnel over the internet directly onto the Azure network. This allows you to connect securely to the virtual network running in Azure without the need for a third-party firewall. Site-to-site VPN and ExpressRoute are two methods commonly used by SMB and enterprise clients to connect to Azure. The site-to-site VPN creates a secure tunnel over the internet from an on-premise firewall into Microsoft Azure, where the ExpressRoute usually connects to a WAN or other service straight into the Microsoft backbone, allowing a more private and dedicated link straight into Azure, reducing latency even further. If you already have virtual networks in Azure, you can pair them together, allowing you to route your traffic from one subscription or region to another, and the private link service allows you to securely access PaaS resources across tenancies and subscriptions as well. So when you start using Microsoft Azure, you'll most likely start using the Azure portal. So the Azure portal is your gateway into consuming Azure services. The Azure portal gives you a single pane of glass to govern, configure, secure, protect, and monitor your resources, whether they are simply IaaS virtual machines or an Azure data warehouse. The Azure portal can be found at portal.azure.com. You can create dashboards for your resources and really customize the portal to match your requirements, adding items that you so it can easily be accessible. The Azure portal will be one of your most key resources when using Azure. It is recommended to have multi-factor authentication set up when using Azure resources to help secure at an identity level. The Azure mobile app is another alternative way to connect to Azure and useful for those on the go. When you are using the mobile app, you can enable push notifications for your services. So if there is an outage, you'll get a pop-up notification on your phone. You can even run scripts and start and stop virtual machines when using it. Although it may not be your daily driver, it's a useful resource to be aware of. It has saved me hours from having to connect to Azure through other means just to do some simple tasks. I recommend you download it and give it a go. So the Azure Quickstart Center is a library of great resources, allowing you to spin up simple and complex services using Azure Resource Manager templates provided by Microsoft and the great community. At the time of this recording, there is 1,029 Quickstart templates in the gallery. From deploying virtual machines to installing Configuration Manager in Azure, there's a lot of resources to get you up and running quickly. Why reinvent the wheel? A lot of the responsibility of cloud operations is governance. Governance is the organizational and security standards of your resources. They include things like naming conventions, tagging, and security configuration. This may be easy when it's just yourself using Azure, but what if you have teams or you include the developers as well? Maintaining this can get pretty hard. So that's where Azure Policy comes into play. Azure Policy evaluates resources in Azure by comparing the properties of those resources to business rules. Resources are evaluated at specific times during the resource lifecycle, the policy assignment lifecycle, and for regular ongoing compliance evaluation, the times or events that cause a resource to be evaluated, i.e. a resource is created, updated, or deleted in a scope with a policy assignment. A policy or initiative is newly assigned to a scope. A policy or initiative already assigned to the scope is updated during the standard compliance evaluation lifecycle, which occurs every 24 hours. So this means essentially that you might have an Azure policy that deploys a tag. So business owner tag. So the business owner is finance. So if you create a resource and it doesn't have a tag, you can either enforce that tag to be created at startup and deny the creation of those resources, or the Azure policy will remediate and tag that resource at the time that it gets updated, or once every 24 hours when the Azure policy complaints come up. So you know that your resources are in the best state. The business rules for handling non-compliance resources vary widely between organizations. Example of how an organization wants the platform to respond to a non-compliant resource include deny the resource change, log the change to the resource, alter the resource before the change, alter the resource after the change, deploy related compliant resources. So again, that means that, for example, if you're deploying a virtual machine and you have a Azure policy that's set that all the disks need to be encrypted. If the disks aren't encrypted, you can deny that. So you know you're never going to end up with virtual machines with unencrypted disks. It's a really powerful tool and definitely worth spending the time on for your Azure governance. Another really great tool is the Azure Advisor. So Azure Advisor is a Microsoft service that provides recommendations based on your deployed Azure services configuration. By analyzing data from various services, it helps you optimize your Azure configuration using the 5 pillars of the Microsoft well-architectured framework. Those 5 pillars are reliability, security, cost optimization, operational excellence, and performance efficiency as a baseline. By leveraging Azure Advisor's recommendations, you can enhance and refine your Azure services, costs, security, reliability, operational excellence, and performance. I recommend this becomes a monthly operational task to review and amend to keep on top of your Azure services, not only from a cost perspective, but security and operational as well. Microsoft add new rules to the advisor all the time. So you may find that your resources might be 100% compliant one month and then not the next. It's a really good resource to keep an eye on. Although we all like when services just run, sometimes that just isn't the case. Azure Service Health notifies you about Azure Service incidents and planned maintenance, so you can take action to mitigate any downtime. Configure customizable alerts and use a personalized dashboard to analyze any health issues that may occur. You can monitor the impact of your cloud resources and get guidance and support and share details and updates. If there's ever something weird going on, the Azure Service Help dashboard is where I plan for an unplanned incident or maintenance. So Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor helps you maximize the availability and performance of your applications and services. It delivers a comprehensive solution for collecting, analyzing, and acting on telemetry from your cloud and even on-premise environments. This information helps you understand how your applications are performing and proactively identify any issues affecting them and the resources that they depend on. Azure Monitor is essentially the glue that holds your services together and helps you give you that single pane of glass visibility of your workloads that you need to run things efficiently. Azure Monitor is really good. You can set up alerts and you can set up automation activity as well. So for example, if a virtual machine shuts down, you can automatically have Azure Monitor configure an alert, which then sends an automation runbook to restart it. Same thing, you could scale out resources, you can act to alerts, you can do your normal disk space and CPU alerting using Azure Monitor, But yeah, Microsoft have really done a really good job with this, and they've based it off learnings that they've made with their System Center Operation Management product. So when monitoring your resources in Azure, Azure Monitor is the place to go. So compute options for all types of traffic. So compute options for all types of apps. You may be ready to create your first virtual machine in Azure, but you just don't know where to start. You may be asking yourself, what is this DV2 virtual machine size? Believe it or not, there is method to the madness. General purpose VMs have a balanced CPU to memory ratio. These are ideal for testing and development, small to medium databases, and low to medium web servers. Compute optimized VMs have a CPU to memory ratio. They're good for medium traffic web servers, network appliances, batch processors, and application servers. Memory optimized virtual machines have a high memory to CPU ratio. These are great for relational database servers, medium to large caches, and in-memory analytics. Storage optimized VMs have a high disk throughput and I/O, which is ideal for big data, SQL, NoSQL databases, data warehousing, and large transactional databases. GPU optimized VMs are specialized virtual machines targeted for heavy graphic rendering and video editing, as well as model training and deep learning. These are available as single or multiple GPUs. And finally, high performance compute is the fastest and most powerful CPU virtual machines with optional high throughput network interfaces. This table gives you a really good guide on what VM types to select. Selecting the right VM type can save you issues with performance and cost in the future. So the first thing to look at when creating a naming standard for Azure as part of your governance is some restrictions that they have when naming resources. Some resources have limits of character length and type, but others such as storage accounts are globally unique. This means that only one resource of that type can exist in the world at a time. This is because that one resource is usually publicly accessible, so the name that makes up the name of the storage account also makes up the URL, which is publicly accessible, and you can only have one. Other resources are bound to specific resource groups, so you can't create a resource with the same name in the same resource group as another resource that already exists with the same name in that resource group. Or like subnets, you're limited at the resource level, i.e. you can't have two subnets in the same virtual network with the same name. We covered a few topics today at a high level: hybrid public clouds, IaaS versus SaaS, the extensive Azure global backbone, and the rate of change in the Microsoft Azure environment. Microsoft Azure really does have it all, and most services integrate with each other seamlessly. I recommend you set yourself up an Azure subscription, even ask your organization if they have a Microsoft developer agreement to get access to Azure and get some hands-on. Thank you for watching the Microsoft Azure overview. Hopefully you have learned something. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This is the first of many videos, hopefully, with a lot more going further in depth. Let me know if there are any specific topics you want covered, and in the meantime, you can find me on Twitter, my website, or LinkedIn. Have fun, and welcome to the cloud family.